All right. Emily, my turn.
Yes.
So we're glad you all are here. We're going to be talking about our mini grant program today. And we do have a new wrinkle, a new opportunity within the mini grant program. And mini grants will be the bulk of what we discuss, but we are also going to share a little bit for those of you who may be thinking about submitting for one of our larger grants that has a deadline in winter of 2021 for the next time around. So we'll spend a little time on that just to give you a heads up of things that you ought to be thinking about now to get ready for that. But the bulk of what we do is going to be sharing some information about the mini grants available through the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area. You want to go to the next screen? Okay, so we do have a number of you that have joined us today that haven't applied for mini grants in the past, and you may be new to what the Heritage Areas program is. By the way, I should have introduced myself. I'm Liz Chateau. I'm the director of the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area, and Emily, who is greeting you as you joined us, is our assistant director, and she's sort of our technical whiz today and going to keep an eye on the chat, but she also is the one who directly administers the mini grant program. So I'm going to turn it over to her in a minute. But just to give you an introduction to, the concept of heritage areas, we have 13 certified heritage areas in the state of Maryland. And heritage areas really are designed to support the economic well-being of Maryland's communities. As you see here, we focus on supporting preservation of our built and natural environments. We are interested in history, traditions, natural resources, aspects of culture and the arts, but with a real focus on what are those place-based experiences that draw the visitors to our area that then bring about economic impact. And our work is more important than ever today as we rebound from the pandemic crisis, and we help our partners, nonprofits and government entities, strengthen the product that they have available for visitors who will come and then stimulate that heritage tourism economy. If you want to go to the next one, Emily. So our particular Civil War heritage area, we focus on the Civil War, and you'll hear me say this a few times throughout the program, Civil War, because that's our big strength. It's already the hook that draws so many folks to Frederick, Carroll, and Washington counties, and that's where our heritage area is based. But once we've drawn them here, Civil War is sort of that portal that we use to invite them to engage with all there is to see and do. So you will hear me say that we are really open to a broad way of thinking about heritage tourism here. But this is our stated mission statement. We promote stewardship of historic, cultural, and natural Civil War resources. We encourage superior visitor experiences. We're interested in tourism, economic prosperity, and then educational development as it relates to those things. And in that way, we improve the quality of life for our residents, for the community, but also for the visitors who come here. If you want to keep going there, Emily. So heritage tourism, there's lots of definitions. We are sharing the one that the National Trust for Historic Preservation uses, and it's traveling to experiences, the places and the activities that authentically represent the stories and people of the past and the present. Every day that passes, we've got a new moment in history to share. And I would say Emily in creating this slide bolded the word authentically. Authentic is a big piece of what is the heritage tourism draw to an area. If you want to keep going there. So, and authentic experiences for visitors and locals, we've just got a few examples here. You can think of more. You know, we would use the term education very broadly. That could include exhibits, signage in terms of things like interpretive wayfinding or wayside panels that you might come across on trails, publications certainly, apps, websites, various types of programming. I mean, our heritage area is really strong in those recreational opportunities that are also tied integrally with the history of our area, so trails, rivers, the battlefields themselves, and of course preservation and preservation activities for our purposes could include acquisition of historic properties, acquisition of land that's important in a Civil War heritage area. You know, battlefield land is important to acquire and preserve, and it can also involve the hands-on work to keep the land and the physical properties preserved and in good shape, so that they remain that asset for our visitors. Okay. And so there are a couple of types of heritage area grants, and Emily gave us these lovely dogs. The big dog grants are project grants that I'm going to be talking with you. We're going to come back around to that at the end of this webinar. So project grants through the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority are capital grants up to $100,000. That's sort of your brick and mortar type projects. Also your acquisition projects are going to fall into capital. Non-capital grants up to $50,000. These grants are grants that nonprofits and government units in our heritage area are eligible to apply for because they are within our boundaries. So they can only be approached through us. And then the mini grants focus on non-capital. And this year, and it's probably this year only, we do have an operating grant opportunity through the mini grants, but I'm going to let Emily share those details with you.
All right, so I'm just going to give a brief overview about our two different types of mini grants this year. We have project mini grants, which fund projects from $500 to $5,000, and these are for non-capital heritage tourism projects. The things that folks have described in the comments would generally jive with that. They're things that that heritage tourists, when they come to the area, can go and do. We'll get into detail about the different types of non-capital tourism projects we typically see. And then this year only, we have an operating mini grant available to pay operating expenses from $500 to $3,000. This is for heritage tourism nonprofits only, whose operations have been interrupted by COVID-19. And applicants, you'll see this is noted throughout the presentation. Applicants will be welcome to apply for only one type of mini grant. So either the project mini grant or the operating mini grant. Our pool of funds is very limited. We have $25,000 to disperse. And with the projects, we know that never is enough to fund every worthy project. And so now with the operating in the mix as well, we want to make sure we can spread that money as far as we can. And so eligibility, project mini grants are available to nonprofits and municipalities located within the boundaries of the heritage area, and operating mini grants are available to nonprofits only. We're following the example of the state program with that by limiting it only to nonprofits. And you can see the boundaries of the heritage area in Carroll, Frederick, and Washington counties. I'll send a link along. We cover the 3 counties, but not the entirety of the 3 counties. And so you may have to check to see if you're within it. But I know that Williamsport is in, and so is Brunswick. And so I know a few of you are definitely within the bounds. And again, applicants may only apply for one type of mini grant, either project or operating. And both mini grants have a matching requirement. Like all of the heritage area grants from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, that's where we get the funds for our mini grants as well. recipients have to match their grant award. And so if you make a request for $2,500, you have to match that with another $2,500 applied to the same project. However, new this year, you can use any combination of cash, aka actual dollars spent, cash, including on staff salaries, and in-kind support. And in-kind in this case is going to be donations, even the value of volunteer hours. Those hours are surprisingly valuable. It's well over $20 in the state of Maryland. I'll send you the calculation we use for that as well. You can use those as part of your match. However, they're going to have to be documentable. And so you need to be keeping receipts for cash things, keep timesheets for your volunteers, make note of whenever someone gives you a discount on the full expense of something, that full expense can be applied to your mini grant project as match. The only thing you cannot use is state of Maryland funds. The state wants to see their investment leveraging more investment, and that can be private dollars, you can use federal dollars, you can use local dollars. The only thing you can't use is going to be state of Maryland funds. And so we're going to specifically get into the project mini grants first before we get into the operating mini grants. And these are $500 to $5,000. This round is going to be very similar to previous rounds, and the only big change for previous applicants and grantees is going to be that new loosening of the rules for matching funds. So project mini grants can go towards non-capital projects. Non-capital projects are things that generally do not involve bricks and mortar, but they're going to need to contribute to heritage tourism in some way. Some examples of that we have funded in the past is walking tours, exhibits, interpretive signage like Civil War trail signs. The only thing about signage is that you can't apply for wayfinding signage. Those are seen as different in the eyes of the state. And so if it's interpretive like an exhibit outside, then that counts as a non-capital project. You can also apply it to digital and printed material like websites, brochures, rack cards, and actually you'll find that the larger project grants, those can't pay for marketing. And so this is the only grant program that the heritage areas have that can be applied to marketing expenses. We can also pay for parts of events like honorariums for speakers, promotions, things like that. Although we'll see when we can next have in-person events, but maybe we could pay for parts of a virtual event. And sometimes we can pay for artifact conservation. That's happened in the past, but we're going to have to be able to see that it is directly being applied to something that visitors are going to be able to see, if not immediately, soon after. And so now we're going to get into the application narrative. This is the place where you're going to tell us about your project. So these answers need to be very brief. Don't worry about getting into great detail. Just let us have sort of the flavor of your project, what it's going to consist of. And the extreme detail is going to come up in the timeline and the budget. But the narrative questions are going to be, does this project have urgency? Why does it need to happen this year? Could we wait until next year? How does this relate to the goals in our management plan? Now, this question is really important, and it's a place where your application can really shine, because frequently folks don't really read the management plan, or they're not taking direct quotes. If you're able to go into our management plan and tie this to the stated goals in the management plan or to our interpretive themes, which we'll get to in a moment as well, reviewers are usually really impressed by that. And it doesn't need to be a direct tie to something that happened between 1861 and 1865. But if it's something that can tie to the legacy of the Civil War in some way, you'll see we have pretty open interpretive themes. Then reviewers are usually impressed by that. And then what partnerships will you form or strengthen through this project? As a heritage area, we're interested in sort of convening the group in order to create a larger tourism experience for people. And so will you work with your DMO? Will you work with a scenic byway or your Main Street community or a local museum consortium or association? How will this improve sort of the field for everyone? How or where will you secure your matching funds beyond the mini grant to complete this project? And keeping in mind that that can be any combination of cash or in kind. We just need to see what your plan is for matching. And how will you complete this project if you only receive partial funding? That's a question where sometimes that helps us get other applications in. And so If you show us how you can receive partial funding, that can make the difference between not being funded at all or having a portion of your application be funded. And then if your project will create a tangible physical or digital project, how will it be maintained after the grant period has ended? And sometimes that consists of having a plan for continuing to fund it. If it's a Civil War trail sign, for example, just what's the plan for maintenance? And so now we're going to get into specifically the timeline, which is going to be sort of the way that you walk us through how you're going to execute the application and the project. And so one tip is definitely create the timeline in collaboration with all involved team members, especially now. It can be hard for folks to coordinate larger projects because we're so busy with all sorts of pandemic response and all these other projects that we're trying to get done. And so make sure that you create the timeline in collaboration with everyone so that you're less likely to have unexpected things pop up along the way. However, we'll get into it later. We do understand that unexpected things do happen and they will happen. And this year is a great example of that. And so we're always interested in allowing grantees to continue their projects and spend their mini grant funds and create that product. And we'll work with you on extensions and amendments. So the next timeline tip, though, is consult with vendors on turnaround times. If you can show that you've consulted with a vendor on how long it will take to print those brochures, that shows that you've done the footwork to execute your project as soon as you receive funding. Write a detailed timeline that demonstrates you've considered all steps necessary to complete the project. And so definitely get into the nitty-gritty. Is there going to be a committee that's meeting to create this thing? When is their first meeting going to be, do you expect? We'll get into the concrete example of a good timeline after this slide. If your project receives funding, please set calendar alerts for your key dates that could impact the project completion dates that will know ahead of time if something is sort of moving more slowly than we expected. And in the end, if your funded project is not running according to the timeline, you will be permitted to request an extension or amendment. And so don't be afraid of being really specific. It won't come back to bite you in the end. We'll be able to work with you on creating a new timeline. So a sample timeline. Here we have a walking tour brochure. Here you can see the timeline is not make walking tour brochure. The timeline shows that they're going to start with research, and then they're going to get into drafting their brochure script, vetting it with their historical society curator and academics at the local college, showing us who's going to be involved, and then revising it as necessary. And then in here, they built in the first draft and then the final draft, how long they expect that process will probably take. They're going to collect photos to illustrate their brochure and carry out new photography as needed. And they're showing when they expect these things to happen. They're soliciting quotes, providing scripts, getting into design drafts and final designs. They get into the proof and they get into the production schedule, sending it to the printer, and then the expected delivery of the final product. And then they're ending it with, I've got the bar cover, the media announcement and inaugural tours, which shows us how they're going to be reaching out to the heritage tourism visitor at the end. This is where it's going to reach people who are coming to the region. And in this case, maybe it could be a remote tour that people are taking. They're not expecting folks to come in and get a tour guide. They're expecting them to come in, take the brochure, and complete the walking tour in a safe and distanced way, perhaps. So next, we're going to get into the next detailed thing is the budget. Many of our grant reviewers can be real sticklers, and this is the first thing they look at. So this is a really important section. So in this case, more detail is definitely better. Show specific line items and indicate the basis for your costs. And so if you're able to show, we're going to get these brochures and it's 25 cents each and we're planning to order 2,500, show 25 by 100, and so you'll see that in the example of the budget we'll have in the next line. You'll be able to see a good example of what that looks like. But ask vendors for an estimate and show us that you've done the work to get realistic figures. Show how you would modify the scope of project if only partially funded. Sometimes that means breaking something out so that it's its own line item, and then in the application itself, you can refer back to specific line items you would be more willing to cut if need be, so that we can see how it could still happen. Know where your matching funds will come from, and remember that in-kind support counts as match. You'll see we have columns for cash and in-kind support to show the match as part of your budget. And remember that staff time can also be part of the cash match if documentation shows that their time was spent on this project specifically. And so your staff time for the entire month is probably not going to be just for this project. However, if they're spending 25 hours writing something, then you can record that, and we'll see that their time was spent on this, and here's the cash amount that they were paid. And then this is a little bit complicated, but you'll see in the example, in execution, it's not actually that complex. Up to 10% of the grant funds you request can be used for indirect costs, aka kind of operating costs, your rent, utilities, salaries, personnel costs, professional service fees. This is another case where we're following the example of the state. There was legislation, I think, Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong, about this and state grants. And so the state has started doing this 10%, and we've decided to do the 10% in our mini grants as well. But that is optional. You don't have to do that. It's only if you would like to take 10% out of your mini grant project itself to apply to sort of operating indirect costs. So here's a sample budget. In this case, it's more of the walking tour brochure. So they have their volunteer historian and writer, and there's some sort of contractor. Their hourly rate is going to be $35, but they're donating it to the organization. And so 25 hours at $35 each, that means that they have $875 in in-kind match already up there. And then they have their staff editor who they're paying. And so she is working 25 hours at $25 each. And that goes into their cash match column. And then the brochure design based on preliminary estimates from graphic design firms, that's as detailed as you need to get about reaching out to vendors. Put that into the mini grant fund where the mini grant is going to be paying for the brochure design, $800. And then they're printing and they're showing us they're expecting to print 3,000 at 50 cents each. And it's also based on preliminary printer estimates. So we know that's where that number comes from. And they're planning to use the mini grant to help pay for part of that. But they also expect to use a little bit of their own cash to pay for the full expense. And then they also decided to slide some indirect costs in there, $200, because they're requesting $2,000 total. So you can see their cash and their in-kind also adds up to $2,000 for a project that's a total of $4,000. And let me know if you have questions or comments in the comments. I'm going to check this out a little bit.
Yeah, I saw there was one question about do the indirect costs have to be matched? If you are building those into what you hope the grant will cover, it does have to be matched. But you can see from the example that Emily gave, the line items don't have to be matched 50-50 for each line item. It just is at the bottom. What your combination of cash and in-kind needs to equal the amount that you're requesting for a grant.
There we go. All right, and then getting into application tips. Apart from the budget is probably the most important thing. We have, you can send drafts, sometimes for feedback from me or from Rachel Nichols. We'll let you know who's the representative for your county. So make sure to refer to and ideally even take quotes from our management plan. Tie your project to one or more of the plan goals. In there you'll see that our plan goals include economic benefit, stewardship, storytelling and interpretation, and coordination. You can easily sort of nest your project inside one of those goals, and then tie your project to one or more of our interpretive themes. And I'll send out more information about that with the follow-up when I send you these slides. Be as specific as possible in the timeline and budget. We will not expect you to execute the project precisely as outlined. We know things happen and things change and timelines change and amounts change, or your needs for the project might change slightly. But we need to know you've gathered realistic dates and figures to execute the project. Show how your project ties into existing heritage tourism efforts, and tap into partnerships and collaboration. Show how that's going to be possible with your project. These are all part of the narrative questions that you'll have on the application. And then make sure you have a plan to maintain and sustain long-term projects. Everything doesn't have to be long-term. an exhibit can open and then it can close. But if it is going to exist for a period of time, you need to have a plan. And then you can also see a list of previous grantees online. You'll be able to click this link when I send this out, and you'll see what sort of other projects we funded in the past. So the process, briefly, start by reviewing our management plan and our 5-year action plan, and you'll find our interpretive themes in there. So look at that first, and then download and complete the application narrative. It's on our mini grant page, which is going to be amongst the links that I'm sending. The narrative is going to be the timeline, the budget, and the 6 questions. If you have supporting materials you'd like to provide, like letters of support or photographs or sketches or maps, things that might be able to illustrate your project, compile those. Contact Heart of the Civil War staff with any questions. I'm going to be your liaison in Carroll County and Frederick County, and Rachel Nichols is going to be the contact in Washington County. We can answer questions. Sometimes we're able to look at drafts and just offer feedback briefly. And actually, it's really good to get in touch with one of us, just that we know that your application is coming. And then submit the entire application online by Friday, October 16th at 5 p.m. And I've included the link to the application page where you're going to submit that. You should receive the results by the end of November 2020, and you can immediately begin incurring expenses for your project as soon as you hear from us. And so the payment of the grant is always a reimbursement. So you can begin incurring expenses once you've been notified. If you've been awarded over $2,500, we know sometimes spending $5,000 in mini grant funds and $5,000 of match for a $10,000 project can be a big lift for organizations. So you can submit a midterm report for partial reimbursement before your project is completed. And then once the project is complete, you can submit the final report to receive the mini grant payment as a reimbursement. And so the usual way is you complete the project, you send in the final report, and then you receive the mini grant check at the end. And the project period is typically 1 year, and we would expect your project to be finished by the end of 2021. But if something were to happen, then we understand, and your project can be extended if you need to. All right, and then getting into operating mini grants. Been a while since I've talked this much. Okay, so operating mini grants. We are going to be awarding $500 to $3,000 for heritage tourism nonprofits whose operations have been interrupted by COVID-19, and which have not been interrupted by COVID-19, right? So this is new this year. These are a bit novel to apply for and also to administer. So we're going to be here for your questions as you go about applying, certainly. So eligible expenses for operating mini grants is operating costs associated with the COVID-19 state of emergency, beginning July 9th, 2020 and extending until 90 days after the end of the state of emergency. And so these mini grants are unique in that we kind of are expecting you to apply them to retroactively to expenses that your organization has already had. And so starting July 9th, that's as early as you can go. These include any expenses that allow an organization to continue operations and to safeguard heritage resources during and after the pandemic. So some examples of that include staff salaries, utilities, insurance, contractor services, rent and mortgage payments. If you have a type of expense in mind and you're not sure if it's going to count as an operating expense, get in touch and ask us. We might know. We might need to take it up to the state level to find out what they say. And so let us know as soon as you can. So getting into the application narrative, we tried to make these short. We didn't want you to spend more than $3,000 worth of man time on it. And so it has several questions and a simple budget. So we're going to ask you to briefly describe your organization, its heritage tourism role, and how it connects to our management plan and or our interpretive themes. And so how is your organization's mission helping further the goals of the Heart of the Civil War? Followed by what is the urgency of your operating fund request? In that question, just tell us what you need to pay for and sort of what is at stake. Followed by a basic budget to show the expenses you expect to cover with the emergency operating grant, as well as your cash and in-kind match. So put that in the budget as well. Then we have a question about what other emergency grants has your organization pursued? And for that question, we've actually provided a short list of potential emergency grants you may have applied for. This is in there in part because we want people to know about more emergency grant programs, but also it's something we'd like to know. And then briefly detail your estimated lost revenue due to COVID-19. And these are all short answers. And briefly detail your elevated expenses due to COVID-19, things like cleaning or things like buying technology for staff to work from home. And then how has your organization adapted to remain active under COVID-19 restrictions? And we're not going to penalize you for being cautious and shutting down a bit. You don't need to be doing face-to-face programs, but we do need to see that you're remaining engaged with your public. All right, so some tips. I mentioned some of these just as we were going over it. Make sure to use concrete examples to show urgency of need. Help us understand what is at stake. If you need to keep the lights on, let us know. Let people understand, is there an administrative assistant who needs to be paid? And if you don't have that next month, then, that's going to lead to all sorts of other issues. Put that in there as the urgency of need. Clearly outline how you intend to use the emergency funds and refer back to the urgent organizational line items. And so your budget and the urgency of need should sort of be in conversation. They should reflect one another. Give your estimates of revenue lost by using numbers from previous years or similar events. From last summer, what were the numbers like and what are the numbers like now? Show us how you came to those estimates when you're answering that question. And similarly, do that when you're talking about increased expenses. And then when discussing how your organization has remained engaged with the public, like I said, you're not going to be penalized for being cautious and for being careful and for keeping people safe. But we do want to see how you've remained active. Are you doing more online programs? Are you doing more, have you created a walking tour brochure, for example, that people can do independently? Show us some specific examples. So here's a really simple sample budget. So interestingly, unlike the project mini grants, in this case, in my opinion, we haven't seen how it shakes out. This is our one and only year doing this. I think the application narrative questions are going to be a little more important to reviewers than the budget itself. But the budget does need to be clear. So in this example, we have the mini grant paying for salary and for cleaning expenses. In this situation, they're showing that they'd like to pay for their administrative assistant, paying them $2,500 a month and covering the months of August and September retroactively. Then they also have elevated cleaning expenses for the months of August, September, and October at $500 a month, so we understand where that $1,500 came from. And then they're just matching it entirely with cash because they'll be paying the admin assistant the rest. So the mini grant fund request is $3,000. Just so that the math works out, showing the admin assistant amount, they put in $3,500 as their match. It's fine to overmatch. You just can't undermatch anything. And that total project is $6,500. But the mini grant award would be $3,000. So the payment of this grant, this one is different because you will receive the mini grant funds once we receive them to distribute from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. So after you sign the operating mini grant agreement. So in this case, because so many of the expenses are going to be retroactive and because organizations just need their money now, we're going to send those funds to you as soon as we can. So we receive all of our mini grant funds as a block grant from the state. And as we know, the state can move slowly when it comes to dispersing funds. And so we're not entirely sure when we're going to receive that block grant. But as soon as we do, those funds will be available to disperse again as operating mini grants. And then the mini grant final report is going to be due within 60 days of the governor terminating the state of emergency. And I actually just reached out to the state to ask about the state of emergency. It was renewed on September 3rd or September 5th. And so it's still active right now. And if it were to end tomorrow, you can still apply for retroactive expenses and we can work out the details of when the mini grant final report will be due. But I expect 60 days after the state of emergency is terminated should be reasonable for a mini grant final report, just showing us how you spent the operating mini grant. So the application process looks pretty similar to the project mini grant application process. We're going to ask that you review our management plan and our 5-year action plan. so that you can tie your operations to our goals. Download and complete the application narrative, which is also available on our mini-grant page. Definitely check the guidelines. Contact Heart of the Civil War staff with any questions. Again, I'm the contact for Carroll and Frederick County. Rachel Nichols is the contact for Washington County, but we're in conversation a lot. And then submit that entire application online the same due date as the project mini-grant, Friday, October 16th at 5 p.m. And we expect we will receive the results by the end of November 2020. Actually, traditionally, our mini-grants results come out by the end of the year, but we're trying to fast track it by a month in an attempt to respond a little more quickly to the crisis presented by the pandemic for our heritage tourism nonprofits. So you can access the application. We'll see if it continues to screen share here on the mini-grant page. This is what our mini-grant page looks like, and it's slowed down a little bit. Okay, so you can, if you get to the heartofthecivil.org website, if you go down to the bottom, you'll see that there is a tab called Stakeholders, and you would click HCWHA Mini-Grants to get to this page. Or you can follow the link when I send you the slides later. And so here you'll see we have project mini-grants first, followed by operating support mini-grants, and the guidelines and the application narrative are immediately available right there. And then to get in your application, you're going to access the application form here. We'll see how slowly this loads. Perfect. Access the application form here, where once again we have the guidelines and the application narrative sort of at your fingertips. And then you're going to fill in your organization name, your tax ID number, your website, mailing address, contact name, and email. If there's any issue, I'll get in touch with that person. Your contact phone number, a brief description of your project or operating request. Feel free to be really brief, just don't worry about that section much. I'm the only one who's going to see that usually rather than the reviewers. Fill in your grant request, how much you're asking for, and your total project budget. So that's also including your match. And then you're going to upload your application narrative right here. And then you have the option to add attachments if you would like to, and then you click submit your application. And when you submit your application, you should come to sort of a success page, and you should also receive an email from the website saying that your application has been successfully submitted. If you don't receive that email, get in touch with me and we can look at other workarounds. All right, and then, so here are your local mini-grant contacts. There's me and there's Rachel Nichols. And now we're moving on to project grants, Liz.
So do you want to take a minute to talk about any of the questions that have come in?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so I'm sort of working my way up from the bottom, actually. I see Kelly White mentioned restoring an artifact. Mm-hmm. And Kelly, you are, tell me, you can unmute if you want. Remind me who you're representing. Is it the museum or is it Main Street?
Hi, I'm actually representing a new nonprofit. We're named the Friends of Historic Brunswick, Maryland.
Okay.
But I also do help with the museum. So it could be either one. If I saw one, if there were a grant that the museum wanted to apply for, we would help them as well. So I'm kind of representing both as a volunteer, just kind of what would be something that would be, you know, that would fit for the city of Brunswick, and we all try to work together. So kind of doing both.
So I mean, so that's excellent. And you know, the museum, your new organization, the city itself, any of those entities could be the applicant. Okay. And I would say so a couple of things. You definitely want to stress those partnerships, that even though one organization will be the applicant, that you all are really working together towards that goal. That will really go far. And that's a good note for anybody else here. if if you have a community-based project, our reviewers will ask, well, where's the historical society in this? Just they're going to want to know, are the neighbors playing well in the sandbox together, and working towards that same goal? I think some of the things the reviewers will want to look at, and I'm gonna toss it back to Emily in a minute, because she actually walked a very similar project, different type of object, but she walked a similar project through to success with the mini grant last year. But you're gonna want to show that you've got conservation treatment proposals from appropriately qualified conservators that you're looking at, and then the setting for where this is going to be installed and shared with the public. There's going to, our reviewers are going to look for assurance that it's got the right kinds of, it's going to be in the right environment for its continued preservation. That sort of gets at the maintenance questions. So, if the materials of this luggage cart are going to be sensitive to heat or humidity or, any other sort of factors, we're going to want to know how that's being addressed. But I'll toss it to you, Emily, because you really worked with one that, at the outset, we weren't entirely sure was going to work out, and it ended up being a terrific project last year.
Yeah, and they're here, so shout out to Keith. Hey, Sue. And so, right, so I think with object conservation, that is, it definitely can be difficult to fully make the heritage tourism argument. And so you're going to have to be really clear in your application how the conservation and exhibition of this object is going to be a game changer for the for the museum or for whoever's going to be exhibiting it. I think that was what was key to the success of the application the last time we received a conservation request, is we had to really see what's it going to look like when someone is visiting this place. Is this going to be an object that's just part of the collection and it was on the to-do list, or is it going to be something that's going to be featured, that's going to be telling a new story, that's going to be really changing the experience for someone? I think especially because this year we anticipate is going to be such a competitive year, I would definitely recommend that we talk about this and definitely send along a draft, so that we can see that you're making the strongest argument possible for the heritage tourism impact of the conservation of this artifact.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thank you.
So go ahead, go Emily.
Oh no, I was about to move on to the next question.
Yeah,
you can go ahead.
That's fine, go for it.
Okay, and then we have a question from Julie Bell-Merritt. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I see it there.
I think so she would like to take high school guidance counselors and community college advisors on a tour to expose them to tourism and hospitality careers. And I think that could be that could qualify. What do you think, Liz?
So I think it's definitely an eligible project. I think your trick is going to be making a really compelling case for our reviewers, especially in terms of the heritage tourism, impact. This is a little bit on the workforce development side, and which is can be a good thing. But I think you're going to really want to do a great job of connecting to our goals. This is going to probably be in the economic benefit aspect, but it's a little bit indirect. This is going to be some seeds that you want to plant here with these students that will probably blossom later. So making the case for why they want to invest in this now, when the new flock of tourism and hospitality professionals will come to bloom a little bit later. That's a mixed metaphor, but and then also the interpretive themes. I think this is definitely something that you want to be in conversation with Rachel Nichols, and of course Emily and I are also always willing to help. Rachel was not able to join us today, but and I know you're probably still in touch with Tiffany Ahalt, who just is quite familiar with our program. let's keep that conversation going as you're developing your application, because we want you to make it the strongest, but it's definitely a different twist. It'll be a new concept for our reviewers. So we'll have to, we're going to have to make it a compelling case, but it's definitely something that could be eligible.
All right, and then Catherine Grattan has a historical walking tour project in mind, and I think that definitely traditionally fits within the parameters of the sorts of things that mini grants fund. But even with that, it's going to be a really competitive year since projects and operating are going to be pulling on the $25,000. And so I would definitely recommend running it by Rachel Nichols and getting her feedback as you go about developing that walking tour. And I think you could definitely make an argument for it being, a key part of the tourism offerings in Williamsport as people are looking for distanced activities and ways of getting people up from the Cushwa Basin up into town so that businesses can begin to recover. I think that there's a lot of potential there. And so definitely send that along to Rachel as well and bring her into the conversation.
And the only thing I would add to that, the walking tour brochures are kind of a classic mini grant project for us. We funded a lot of them over time. One thing that comes up more frequently these days, and even before the pandemic set in, when we get these applications now, our reviewers often will ask, well, if they've only requested funds for a printed brochure, why didn't they also include a digital component? And so you may want to think about that, and there may be a good reason. Maybe you don't need one or the other. There may be reason for it, but if you're proposing something like that and you can include a digital virtual piece, I think it's going to be to your benefit, especially as we're uncertain as to when we'll we'll be out of this pandemic. So I think it might be a good idea to try to include that in a project for any kind of a walking tour type of thing.
Great. All right. So we are coming up on 1 hour and we're about to get into the project grants. So we're going to try to respect your time and, move along as we can. But we know these project grants are, they're big and really helpful to so many organizations in our community. So take it away, Liz.
Okay. And you can go ahead and advance the slide. Really what I'm going to do today is try to focus on the things that make sense for you to be doing now to get ready for the project grant deadline that's going to come up on the 1st of March this year. The project grants, these are our big grants, the big dog that Emily shared with us. And these are actually grants that come to you directly from the state. If you win a grant, one of these grant awards, your contract is with the state through the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. But the only way you are eligible for these grants is because your project is happening within the boundaries of a certified heritage area. So if you're in Carroll, Frederick, or Washington counties, more than likely it is happening within our boundary, although that we are not the whole of any of those counties. So that's a good thing to ask yourself first. Is it happening actually within the boundary? For the most part, I think everybody here would say yes to that. There are two kinds of grants that are available in this way. The non-capital grants, we can pay for things like planning, design, interpretation, events, brochures, technology. Very, very similar to everything that Emily shared about non-capital mini grants. We just can fund them on a larger scale. So you can ask for a grant for up to $50,000 to fund a non-capital project. We do have a minimum now for these grants, and the minimum you can request is a $5,000 grant through these. And that's because you can go to the mini grant for a $5,000 mini grant. And we'll get into the budget a little bit, but a lot of what Emily shared is actually applicable to these big grants, including the loosening of the match requirement. So any combination of cash or in-kind works as match for these, but they are, all these grants do require the dollar for dollar match. Capital grants, we do fund through this program, and those can be up to $100,000. They too must, there's a $5,000 minimum on these. And if you happen to have a really small capital grant, that's where you kind of get caught short because the mini grants cannot fund capital. But the capital, so that could be acquisition we talked about. It might be, maybe you've got some pre-development costs or that engineering drawings, you're not quite ready to start the bricks and mortar yet, but you need some funds for that. Rehabilitation and restoration. Sometimes a capital project requires donation of an easement through the Maryland Historical Trust. That is not always the case, and you will not know whether it's going to be the case with you until the grant award happens, or maybe they might get a preliminary feel from MHT, but nothing official will happen with that until the grant award happens. But at the time that you apply, you are asked to acknowledge that you realize you might be asked to donate an easement. That does not constitute giving the easement. It just shows that, yes, we're aware, we're willing to have that conversation. As I said, it's a dollar for dollar match. The thing about these grants is that they cannot pay for the grant award itself. The grant dollars are not going to pay for your staff, and they will not pay for marketing. And where the bullet here says it doesn't go towards overhead fees, that actually probably should be adjusted, because you can include the 10% indirect costs in these. But staff and marketing cannot be paid for by the grant dollars. On the other hand, those things can appear in the matching side of your budget. And it's a good thing to include them in the matching side of your budget, as long as they're directly related to the project itself. You want to go ahead and advance that slide? So the way this works is the project grants are reviewed locally. So we have a group of grant reviewers within the heart of the Civil War that will read the grants carefully. We use the same criteria that will later be applied at the state level by the state review panel. When we do our grant review, we're scoring on the basis of merit, and then we're developing a priority order. Here's the priority order for that we would like to see in terms of how these grants are funded. And that ends up being a part of the decision at the state level, but it's not the only decision. The state level also applies their review process. So, but we are looking for, in terms of criteria, is it consistent with our management plan? Are you making a case for the significance of the project and the need for the project? Is the design well thought out? Are we confident that this is a project that is ready to get started? The project management, who's going to be overseeing the implementation of the project? Do we have the right people involved? What are the deliverables, and what is the impact of this project going to be? Does it coordinate with broader initiatives like Main Street programs, byways, other broader things happening within the community, particularly as pertaining to heritage tourism? When you read our management plan, you will see something called target investment zones. And back when that plan was developed, you had to be within a target investment zone to ask for a capital project. That particular thing is not so much the concern, but there are some criteria that we do ask capital projects to meet. And we can talk about that with any of you that may have a capital project in mind. And then bottom line, what is the public benefit of this project going to be? These are the areas that are going to be scored at the local level, and then we send it all on to the state, and there's a state panel that also scores it from the state perspective but using these same areas, these same criteria. You want to move that along then? So our grant cycle this year, I strongly urge you to take advantage of the trainings that will be offered. Usually it's mid-January. There's a slight chance we might have an offering at the very end of December, but there will be additional trainings. They're going to go into more of the technical aspect of the online grant software, and they will also just reinforce some of the things that I'm giving you in a rather summary fashion now, but they'll go into a little bit more depth. The intent to apply forms are required. They're very easy. Anything you put in an intent to apply form can change, including the project itself, including the amount of money you think you're going to ask for. Those are going to be due on January 29th of 2021. And it's an online process to submit those. If you have any idea, if you just want to keep that window of opportunity possible, I encourage you to put in the intent to apply form. If you end up choosing not to apply in the end, that's fine. That does happen. But one of the things this does, it allows us to plan for what could be coming our way, and it also helps us build the case for need, because at the state level, the session is happening, and they're going to decide what's going to be the budget for the Heritage Areas program in the coming year. The more we're able to make a case for need, the more we've got to to build that argument. So we judge that by what comes in the intent to apply forms. In mid-February, we haven't decided the date yet, but there will be a deadline where we invite you to send us your drafts as complete as you can get them. They don't always come as a complete draft, but it's the date where we say, if you send us something for feedback, we promise you we'll get you that feedback in time that you can actually use it as you finish your application. It's entirely optional. The folks that take advantage of it tend to do better with successful grant applications. This year, that deadline is going to be March 1st. And then it's not until July that the state makes the actual grant decisions. The Maryland Heritage Areas Authority will vote on those grants on July 8th. Either that day or a couple of days later, you'll start to get your emails saying, happy emails or sad emails. But that date of the vote, July 8th, if you get your grant, that is the date that you can start incurring your expenses. And that includes on the matching side of your budget, as well as the expenses that you're going to use the grant dollars to support. So that July date is an important one to keep in mind as you plan your project timeline, as you think about, what costs can wait until then. You might have a project that you actually have to spend some money on ahead of time. You won't be able to include that in your grant budget, but you can mention it in the application that, because that will demonstrate some commitment. You're already getting started, but you won't be able to use those funds for the grant money or the match. If you get a grant, it's usually any time between September and December that the actual grant agreements come. But as I said, you can start spending your money as soon as you've got the grant. And then they do usually give an initial disbursement of about 25% of the grant, and that will usually land in your bank accounts electronically anywhere from November to February. So that's kind of a quick overview timeline. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So I'm not linking through to the website like Emily did, but this might look a little bit familiar. At the bottom of our homepage, in that section for stakeholders, underneath where the mini grant page shows up, you'll see a link that goes directly to MHAA project grants. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. If you go to the next slide. And this is what it looks like now. What you will find on that page right now is all the information and all the materials from the last round. We can go ahead and update the dates and deadlines, but things like the application, the guidelines, things like that, those are all from last year, and we go ahead and keep them there because for the most part, they don't change drastically. They can still be useful to you if you want to start to get a feel for what this is all about, what the application is going to look like, and that kind of thing. As soon as the state has opened up the round, which will be sometime in December, we'll change all those links to make them current for the round. You're going to be asking for a fiscal year 22 grant, but as I say, we've left the materials here just because they can be useful at any rate. If you want to go ahead and go to the next one. So what I really want to focus on are a few things that you can begin to do now, even though this grant round is not open. Because honestly, if you don't think about what putting together your project grant until December when the round opens, it's highly unlikely that you would be able to put together a competitive grant. On the other hand, it's not at all unusual for somebody to sit in on this webinar today and really be thinking about not this upcoming round, but the one after that for their grant. These project grants do tend to be pretty complex. We try to make the mini grant process really easy, and that's partly because the project grant process is not easy. So if it takes a year for you to actually get a project ready to be competitive for a grant, that's actually a pretty common occurrence. But something you can do now is you can go ahead and visit the portal for the grant software, and you can make an account. So this is just a page that I've snipped to share from what's called the Quick Start Guide. There's a link to that guide on the project grant page that we just looked at a minute ago. So you can click on the Quick Start. This is taken from that. So you're going to go as a new applicant. If you don't already have an account, you can go ahead and set up an account, and that'll just mean you're ready when those intent to apply opportunities open up. You've already got your account made. One thing that I do want to point out is that this portal is the portal for the Maryland Historical Trust, and it can be confusing to distinguish the Maryland Historical Trust from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. The Maryland Heritage Areas Authority is actually an autonomous part of within the executive branch of state government, but it's very, very tiny. And so the staff actually live within the Maryland Historical Trust, but they're in fact two different things, but we use that trust hardware. So if you also ever think you're going to apply for a Maryland Historical Trust grant or an MHT grant, setting up this portal will also help you for that. If you ever want to nominate something for a state preservation award, that process actually is open right now. It'll take it through the same portal. So it can be to your advantage to go ahead and get that set up. Let's go to the next slide. So read that management plan you've been hearing us talk about. Think about what are the connections between the project you want to take on and our plan. The goals, the interpretive themes. There are other sections within that plan as well. Those are just sort of the low-hanging fruit where you can probably find a fit for your project. And I would encourage you to think in terms of projects that are already in your long-range plan. Where do we have the fit between what your organization has that's mission-driven, that is in your plan for development anyway, and where's that intersection with our grants? That's going to be a sweet spot, and being able to point to your own planning documents as well as ours will help strengthen your presentation. You do want to pay attention, as I said, to those broad goals and interpretive themes, and then stay in conversation with your local grant contact. And that we'll have a slide with those contacts come up. It's going to be Emily, it's going to be Rachel, and then I'm also going to serve. We divide up the 3 counties, and I'll be the contact for the Frederick County grants. So so stay in conversation, and we can, and especially if you're struggling with, I'm not sure how to make the fit with the management plan, you know, we can probably help you make a connection there. If you want to go to the next slide. So if you have a project, a capital project, I mentioned that a preservation easement may or may not be required, but this can be an issue that you want to go ahead and discuss with your board, or if you're doing a project that involves a different property owner, they will be asked to attach a letter. There's a particular form letter that says it's understood that an easement may be requested, and that the owner, the property owner, is willing to consider giving that easement. Again, this does not mean that an easement will be requested. We have had more than one capital project funded at high levels where the Maryland Historical Trust has said, we don't think we need to carry an easement on this, no problem, that's fine. But you need to be prepared that it could come up. And so it might be good to go ahead and have those conversations started now. What you don't want to do is invest a whole lot of time in preparing an application and then discover that your board's unwilling to sign that letter. And we can also, one thing we did last year that was really helpful is we actually asked the folks from the state in the easement program to do we did a conference call then. We could make it a Zoom this time round, and where direct answers could be answered. And I think that really helped everybody's comfort level. But go ahead and start those conversations early on. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So the budget is going to look very much like the budget forms that Emily shared for the mini grants. But I want to stress that with these big grants, very often the budget is the first thing that our grant reviewers turn to. They'll take a look at a budget, and if that doesn't look strong, if it doesn't seem complete and detailed, you know, a budget really does tell a story, and you need to keep that in mind when you build your budget. And if you haven't won the grant reviewer with that budget page, it's going to be an uphill climb from there. And like I say, a lot of times that budget might be embedded in the middle of the application, but they will turn directly to it and take a look at that before they look at anything else. So you do want to start to get estimates, either formal estimates or informal. Sometimes we do have people submit actual, estimates for projects that they are going to use when the grant is funded. Other times it's more of a less formal process, but if you can, show to the reviewers that you've got some reasonable estimates. You've been talking to people in the field. You've had folks come out and look at what you've got. That will build their confidence that you've got that you're going to be ready, and that the budget is going to cover what you need. So sometimes starting that process early on can be helpful, especially with a capital project. And then and begin to think about what are the sources that are going to come that are going to supply your match. Dollar for dollar match is required, but as we've been telling you, it can now be in any combination of cash and in kind. But I do want to stress, you could have a totally in-kind budget with no cash whatsoever, but you will be asked to justify that and to document it. And before you get your final award, There's going to have to be satisfaction that you've got documented in-kind support and cash support, whatever combination you've used, but that all of it has tied directly to the actual project. So, so just keep that in mind, because I'm a little wary of, and I think all of us will be a little wary of projects that come in with a high degree of in-kind. We're going to be really looking at, is this reasonable? Will they be able to show this and document it at the end of the project? You want to go to the next one? And then the last area I really wanted to stress with you is you do want to think carefully about your project design and the folks that are working on the project. Again, the readers of these applications should come away confident that you know what it's going to take to get the project done. You understand the steps that are involved in, what are the incremental things that have to happen to get you to the end goal. And then for your timeline, something that we frequently see is people think they can move faster than is reasonable. Our folks generally will identify that. They'll say, you know what, I think they're being overly ambitious. Don't hesitate to give yourself plenty of time. Things happen. There's reporting that's due at the end of this. And just don't, you don't need to pressure yourself to move faster than is reasonable, even if you really hope to achieve a speedier timeline. Just don't be overly ambitious there. You're going to give the next slide then. And then after, when we officially open this round for the fiscal year 22 grants, as I say, that'll be sometime in December, and it'll be when the state releases the application. We send our Mason-Dixon dispatch. It's an e-newsletter, and that's how many of you found out about this session today. You want to watch out for that because we will announce it in the Mason-Dixon dispatch. Do attend one of the training sessions or webinars that the state offers. Those will be shared through the dispatch as well. And typically they're also recorded. So if you need to, you can watch a recorded version. That I think that will really help you. And then don't procrastinate, because you will need all the time available to develop a compelling project. And recruit some help, especially proofreaders. These grants, they are lengthy, they're intense, and you want somebody who's going to catch your grammatical errors, make sure your numbers add up, but also who just isn't too close to it, because you will have devoted, so much time to it, and you know how that goes. It becomes hard to proofread your own work. So get some people that maybe don't even know your project who will be on board to help you out in that way. And again, just stay in regular communication with whomever your local grant contact. It'll be Emily, Rachel, or myself, and take advantage of that mid-February draft deadline. We're usually pretty flexible and willing to maybe even review multiple versions of a draft, and we can keep the conversation going even after mid-February. But when we decide on what that date is, after that date, we might still help you, but we cannot promise our turnaround because of our own time management issues. So we'll do our best. And there you go, local grant contacts. Emily will take Carroll County. I'm going to take all the Frederick applications. And Rachel is your contact for Washington County. So is it chat time now? Oh, I forgot to tell you. I don't know, Emily, do you want to review the online resources?
Sure. Most of these are links that you'll be able to click. I included this at the end so that when you receive the slides, that can be some quick links, but I'll also be including them in the body of an email as well. And so I just wanted to gather together a number of sort of the key online resources for the mini grant round and for the larger project grants. And so here we've got our mini grant page down here at the bottom. And you can find guidelines for both the operating and the project mini grants. Those guidelines are usually only about 2 pages long, and I would really encourage that you read them. It's going to cover everything that we talked about here, but just much more briefly. And then MHAA grant resources. We have a link to our project grant page on our website, which is going to include key dates for you as part of the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Areas region. And then also there's the Maryland Heritage Area Partners page, where you'll be able to see, that's where you can access more information about the state Heritage Area Program. And then the MHA online application quick start guide and guidelines. We have links to both of those. And so, sure, yeah, let's open it up next to any questions.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the